Let's begin. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome an urban legend, Mr. Greg Wilson. It's great to have you on PHEVER, and it's great to finally catch up for chats, mate. How are you?
I'm very good, Dean. How are you? It's good to speak to you.
It is, and you're looking well, and I'm liking all the artwork there behind you. Where are you based at the moment? Where do you call home?
I'm from like Merseyside, so I'm on the opposite side of the River Mersey to Liverpool,
Yeah,
place called New Brighton, which is where I grew up. I've ended up back here.
yeah.
So yeah, that's me. A lot of people assume I'm from Manchester because I've had
You
a
don't
lot.
really have any scouse going on there in the accent as such, you know.
Well, there's a
A
bit.
few Liverpool fans might be questioning this.
No, I mean, to be honest, that goes back to DJing a bit, because when I started off in 1975 now,
Yeah,
back then we used the microphone.
I was only two.
You might not have heard me. We used to use a microphone, and
You put on a voice, I guess.
well, you kind of neutralized your voice, because in those days,
you removed the accent, definitely, yeah.
The ambition of a DJ, if you were like I was a professional DJ. It wasn't a side hobby. I wasn't doing another job.
Yeah.
So, as soon as I come out of school at 16, I was working as a DJ.
Yeah.
And, so the next step at that point, there wasn't the whole kind of club infrastructure that we've got now.
Yeah.
The way things run now. If you were going to be successful back then, you had to get on the radio.
Yeah.
And to get on the radio, a regional accent didn't really work that well for you. And so, DJs didn't hear that so often over the microphone. DJs like neutralize their accent.
It was your microphone voice for presentation.
Exactly. And that kind of takes in. Although if I'm in London or whatever, I've lived in London for a time and everything, the northernness, I mean, people kind of, they know I'm northern. I don't, there's a bit of Manchester, I think, as well, because as I said, I've got so much connection with Manchester that I think people come in from the presumption in lots of ways that's where I'm from.
Yeah.
And they're quite surprised when I say that I'm from near Liverpool.
No, it's an interesting one. We're here today to talk about the Discotheque Archives, but I want to get to that point, if that's okay with yourself. Yeah. I've been reading up obviously a little bit in preparation. I have ordered a copy of it, but it hasn't as yet arrived. So I'm using this opportunity to really help sell what the concept is, as someone who hasn't had a chance as yet to read it as yet.
Oh, good. Well, I can explain to you.
But it's on the way. It's in transit, I've been told. So I wanted to touch on something you mentioned there, which is, starting in the mid-70s, that was really the era of the nightclub. Not so much the clubbing thing that the 90s changed to, but the nightclub. I mean, my first clubbing experience would have been late 80s. I think around 87. I remember being brought to, I was probably only about 15, 16, and my friend's elder sister, anyone in Ireland that wanted to get away for a dirty weekend would get on the boat and head over to Liverpool or head over to Manchester. So we were obviously the guinea pigs, that myself and my mate, that were thrown in so there wouldn't be any funny business. But we just left them, and we were brought to Blackpool, to the pier, for a weekend. And I ended up in the Palace nightclub, and I heard Voodoo Ray for the first time. And I had heard nothing like that up until that point in time. And, I couldn't get near the DJ. He was up in the air, and I had no clue who was DJing it. But I remember that being a life-changing experience. You would have been one of those guys that were making those music calls during the 70s and 80s. So, and you started in the Wigan Pier, which is famous for many different things, but certainly for musical movements and the Northern Soul scenes. Tell us about those days.
Well, I must kind of correct you there. The Wigan Pier had nothing to do with Northern Soul. That was Wigan Casino.
Oh, it was the casino. Yeah, I thought there was obviously a correlation there.
Yeah, I mean, I go back to 1975 when I started out in the local clubs to where I am now. There used to be lots of clubs around here. It was an old seaside resort, so there was a lot of things going on in terms of nightlife. And I started at 15 at a club called the Chelsea Reach, and then further down the road, the Penny Farthing. And They were different. I mean, the Chelsea Reach closed at I think 11:45, so it was an earlier kind of thing. And then everybody went on to two clubs, the Penny Farthing, the Golden Guinea, and originally I was at the Penny Farthing. Now this, these were, like you say, nightclubs. The Golden Guinea were. I ended up and I spent 3 years there, and that was my piece of the rock here, before I kind of moved on to Wigan Pier and all that.
And were they local clubs to the Liverpool area?
Well, they were local to here. They were
like
Brighton was like a seaside resort. It was a kind of failed Blackpool in a sense. It had actually built a tower higher than Blackpool at one point.
I remember, yeah.
and they basically had to pull that down. But there was a lot of stuff. When I grew up, it was still a seaside town. My parents had a guest house, and then we opened a pub, and there were mobile discos in and out every weekend, and wedding receptions, 21st, 18th birthdays, all these kind of things going on.
Is that what gave you the bug?
Pardon?
I mean, even to look back a bit further, is that what kind of gave you the bug to start collecting, or even to cast your mind back before you took up?
Yeah, well, I mean, there were a few little different aspects to it. I mean, I think probably the main three aspects were what I just said. Growing up in a pub where they had discos coming in and out, and I'd sit behind the bar with my mum and have a Coke, and I'd hear all the music. And I became quite discerning. I knew what I thought was good, and what I knew what music, and so I picked up a lot there. But then I had an older brother and sister, and they were buying records, 7-inch singles, and they were bringing in all this amazing kind of Tamla Motown, Stax Atlantic, so the great soul labels of the 60s, artists like Otis Redding, The Temptations, Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder.
What an introduction.
Well, that was it. That was, my first love in music. And I'm really, really thankful for that they were buying those records as opposed to maybe throwaway pop records that we a lot of in the 60s as well. And so I kind of inherited these records. They became my collection. My sister went into the Navy. My brother went to kind of teaching college and everything. And these were left in the house. And that was the start of my record collection. I mean, the third aspect to it as well was being in a seaside town, because everywhere I went, there was music. If you went like to the fairground, there were tracks, like being played, like over the rides. You walked along the beach, people had transistor radios and they were listening to music on that. So there was a kind of constant soundtrack with music, plus I was getting it firsthand from these records that my brother and sister were bringing in. Even as an addition where I grew up, we had jukeboxes in there. And how I got my first records was basically I'd know when the jukebox man was coming round to change the record, and I'd just hang around, and he'd kind of look at me after a while and say, "Did you want to pick a couple of the ones that he'd taken out?"
Would you get a few? Yeah,
so the ones that he was replacing, he was putting the new ones in, he was taking out. Now they just sold those on. I don't know if you remember those days, you used to have a bar through all the middles. Ex jukebox records. So I grabbed a few of those as well, and so by the time I was 10, 11, that was when I was like buying records myself.
Talk about being born into being a selector, though. It's a classic story.
Yeah, well, it's also and another thing I worked out later during the period that I stopped DJing for 20 years. It came to me that I was still DJing in a sense, that if I had people round, I was going, "Have you heard this? Have you seen this? Or have you read this?" I'd get into books and film. And I realized it was this kind of inherent need to share that goes back before I was a DJ. And it's to do with that. So I think that once, I was exposed to these like magical round 7-inch pieces of plastic, that was my path, but it was all about sharing. It was about wow, have
Yeah.
you heard this? You know, and that was what it was all about.
And that is the true essence of a DJ. You know, a DJ selects those tunes to share them with other people. At the very heart of the nature of it, and that's a brilliant summary of how it happened for you. And at 15, then you found yourself making a trade from it.
Well, I did at 15. I mean, I had a friend, Derek Kay. I still, you know, he's still kind of my best friend and everything. We were at school together, and he was into electronics and also into records, and he built his own like rudimentary mobile disco with like a couple of record players, and switch between the two. And this is when we were in our middle school. I mean, he must have only been about 13 then, 12, 13. He was very young, and he would do the school disco. And, you know, and so he then kind of built another console that was much more professional and started going out taking bookings.
Yeah.
So, you know, he was doing this 14 and 15, like being a mobile. I mean, it's mad, you know, when you think you know, like
this was before there was any pioneers or any Citronic.
And these were just these were proper events. These weren't like kind of youth clubs. This was going out to do people's weddings and stuff like that. But you know, and I go along with him sometimes and stuff. And then when I came 15, he replaced his console with another console. And me and another school friend bought the one that he'd been using and started our own mobile disco at that point.
Very good.
But no sooner had I done a few bookings than we played like a wedding upstairs at the Chelsea Reach, this place in New Brighton. We were both 15 at the time. And the DJ never, they had the downstairs was their kind of club part, and the DJ never turned up. And
seized the moment.
Yeah, the manager came up and said, "Would it be possible? Can one of you do this?" Yeah. And I was like, me, straight down there. I was like,
I remember when I started, it was people that had a collection that would get chosen because not everyone was a collector as such, you know.
And the other thing that happened then, you know, which was interesting for this night, was that a lot of clubs back then bought their own records.
Oh, right. And they'd have a selection there.
They had their own records in the club.
Yeah. That was a very 70s thing, yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And the problem was that gave it a very signature sound that wasn't always very adaptive, I guess.
Well, no, I mean, and also what happened was like the DJs also would buy their own, you know.
Yeah,
the club would probably have a deal with the local record shop that they would get X amount of records per week.
Yeah.
But, you know, any self-respecting DJ would buy their own records, but I think the clubs felt, I mean, that was just the way it was back then. Even Wigan Pier, when I went there, they bought their records. They still bought records at that point. Yeah. That was like 1980, 81.
And then trust the DJ to make the right selections to build a night up, I guess, yeah.
And I think they were also kind of covering their own back in case that DJ left.
Yes.
And they had no, you know, at least if they brought somebody else in, they can say, well, here's all the records and all the big records will be in there, you know.
Very good, yeah.
Through. You know, I don't know how it, I mean, in the end, people just dropped that because it wasn't worthwhile and you know.
Well, I guess there was a change in culture and you're touching on what happened in the 70s and 80s per se. You know, obviously there was a change in DJ culture when house music and things started to come over from the US. That must have impacted your day job and your night job per se. You know, what do you remember any standout moments?
Well, it goes before that for me. I'd stopped DJing in 1984 and didn't start.
Oh, it was that early, yeah, okay.
So, you know, it was the era that I was, when I stopped, what I was known for by that point. Things had moved on a lot by then. I'd gone a long way from doing Chelsea Reach. I was now at that point working the two main black music nights underground nights in the north of England that were basically dictating the whole scene in the north and the Midlands in terms of the musical direction. And I was championing this electro music coming out of New York, which a lot of it's now termed as hip hop and stuff, but back then we didn't. Which
obviously was very pivotal in the whole hip hop movement and the breakdance movement that was coming out.
Well, exactly. It was, and at that moment, so 1983, and that's when breakdancing exploded on the streets of the UK, and I was very kind of involved in that too. you know, so you know, it was a kind of period of time whereby everything was in flux, everything was changing. I was in the fortunate position that the two clubs I worked in, Wigan Pier and Legend in Manchester, were absolutely state of the art in terms of the sound systems. You know, the lighting was just like another level. If you walked in a club like Legend now, even now, all these years on, and we're talking, what are we talking? You know, like over 40 years.
40 years, yeah.
It would still blow your mind. We don't see it was you know, you see mega clubs like a Printworks and stuff, and it's amazing. They're huge. Yeah. This was compact. This was 500 people. Everything was just like, it was.
Yeah, I remember those days though, and nightclubs that had the money invested in putting on a show. You know,
at the time of Wigan Pier and Legend, they didn't. This was a total anomaly. I mean, a lot of the clubs that I'd worked in the UK, the sound systems were an afterthought. You know,
right.
It was tinny kind of nasty sounds. You know, this
was blown out of it. Yeah,
yeah, and I again, you know, I mean, I was always progressive in what I was doing. You know, like going back to when I was. Well, I'll just fill you in and kind of link it from when I started DJing as well. A big thing that happened was that I bought a book, and there was a DJ on Radio 1 back in the day called Emperor Roscoe, who was, you know, again, musically, he was more kind of veering towards soul and funk, and he played rock and stuff. He was different than the other Radio 1 DJs. He was a much more of a music-based DJ. And he did some compilation albums for Atlantic that I really got into as well, you know. And when I was 16, so I just started in the clubs, I saw a book, the Emperor Roscoe DJ book, which I bought. And I thought, and a lot of it was to do with radio.
Yeah.
There was a bit about clubs. He called them disco DJs who worked in clubs. And there was a bit about that, but it was mainly radio. But as I was reading it, I kind of read this bit that DJs in clubs can get free records from the record companies. They do fill in a reaction report, and they respond. And this absolutely blew my mind. And further to this, in the back of this book, he had the addresses for all the record companies in the UK and the phone numbers.
The golden tickets.
And you know, I phoned them all throughout the next week. And bit by bit, over the next 6-8 months, I got on all the record mailing lists.
Yeah. I
was within 2 years, because I actually wrote the first 2 years worth of records that I got from promos down in a book. So within 2 years, so that by the time I'm like 17, I've had over 2,000 records.
Wow.
Sent to me by the record. I've had everything that is worth having that's released in the UK. I'm on all the major labels. And that gave me, now that set me apart locally. What happened was that my reputation locally became, this is where you'd hear it first.
Yeah,
I was ahead. And we call that term up front then. I was up front of what was happening elsewhere. Other DJs would be playing these tunes in 3-4 weeks. I had them on promo 6 weeks ahead of the UK release.
Which meant all the guys were going to hear you to see what you were going to play.
So, you know, that was the first kind of step towards becoming a specialist, black music specialist, which is what I absolutely aspired to. I'd gone to a club when I was 16 in Liverpool called The Timepiece, which was predominantly black club. It was musically everything that I hoped that I, you know, could one day. The audience, the dancing, the level of it all. And I kind of saw the future within that. And it's not that I wanted to go and take over the Timepiece because, you know, the DJ, that guy called Les Spain, was this incredible character. But it was 5 years later, that was Legend in Manchester. That was my Timepiece. That was me finding that. And that's why even now, if you'd ask me the question, what's the greatest night you've done as a DJ, I'd just say Legend Manchester circa 1982 to 83. Wow. They were the highs. They were the highest because who I was playing to, what
And
I
the
was
music
playing,
you were playing.
and when it was,
Yeah.
and the social conditions of the time, the fact there was a majority black audience at a time when there'd just been the riots.
And I was going to say, it wasn't an easy time in anywhere in the UK or Ireland. You know, economically, it wasn't a great time. You know, the countries were on their knees financially, but yet people celebrated through music.
But that's always been the way. If you go back to the Depression in America,
Absolutely.
you know, you look at, you know, the jazz era coming through that and everything. People will find a way, you know, and they need an escapism as well. And
but
so
that's almost like the underground, the soul underground.
But I mean,
that name.
I mean, that was a huge. I mean, you see, you had the Northern Soul scene, which was basically geared around looking back into the '60s, digging out tracks that sounded like those great Motown records, but were released by maybe a small independent label, only pressed up 500.
Yeah,
and that's what they were doing. They were mining that. Now,
the rarities,
that's what the Northern Soul scene. But I was never involved in that, and the black crowd were never involved in that.
Yeah. It was
Apart
more
from in a token aspect. The black crowd were always looking forward. So it was funk. It was what was James Brown, Parliament, Funkadelic. It was all these. What was Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, Curtis Mayfield. They were, you know, the '70s was for them, you know, like so rich in terms of the nourishment of the music. They weren't wanting to listen to the music of what was their parents' generation.
Exactly. Look forward.
So everything was progressive in terms of the black music scene that I was a part of, and that went through like jazz funk and into the electro funk side, and then, you know, after the few years after I'd stopped is where it kind of ripples into house. The very first house tracks were played.
I guess we have to ask the question though, what caused you to put the brakes on?
Well, yeah, again, getting to that point, you know, it's like I feel I'm jumping around kind of from point to point. But as I said, I just mentioned that Legend, it couldn't get any better for me. I mean, I started at the Hacienda in the autumn of 1983, doing a night there. I was a specialist. I did Wigan Pier on a Tuesday. I did Legend on a Wednesday. And I did a Manchester gig on a Friday, originally a club called The Exit. I was there for maybe 12 months. But eventually the Hacienda got me across there on the Friday. And the Hacienda then was not what it became. It was this big, huge, cold. I mean, at that time of year, they were struggling to get people through the doors.
Yeah.
It wasn't going well at all. And it would not have survived but for
New Order. Yeah.
It was. And from my, even like the equipment and everything, the way the DJ booth, it wasn't where it later became on the balcony. It was down the side of the stage in a room.
That's right. Yeah. I remember reading about that. It was just buried somewhere at the back of the stage.
Yeah, and it was awful. I'm working at Legend with 3 1200s, which you didn't see then. You know, right in front in a booth, looking over the crowd. I've got like total control of the situation.
Brilliant.
In the Hacienda, I've got a mixer which literally was up here. Down here. It's like
disaster.
I'm trying to say to them, this is wrong. And they're saying, no, we've been told this is the best. And they didn't have a clue at the time. They worked it out bit by bit. They never got the acoustics right in the place. It was never a great sound in there, but they got it, so much better than where we were when I was there. And so it was hard to get things going there. Also, they had a membership situation. The kids that came to my night, they didn't have any money. You know, they were all on the dole. And so to pay for a membership before then, they had to pay to come in.
Yeah.
And so, there was a lot against it, but we had a few one-off nights that were like spectacular. We had Houdini. Run DMC was supposed to be on that night as well. But they pulled out, but Houdini were the main act at the time.
Yeah.
Magic's Wand. Houdini had It's Like That, but it wasn't even released in the UK. It was so underground, but it'd been big on our scene. It'd been a track that I played. So that night was amazing because they brought some break dancers along, and it was a special night. Then Nutriment as well. There was a British electro crew called Nutriment from London, and they came up. And again, that was a special night. And then we had the British breakdance. I'm sorry, the breakdancing championships of the Northwest.
Okay.
Which was the first main breakdancing competition in the UK, and that was held at Wigan Pier Legend, and we had the final at the Hacienda. Tony Wilson was one of the judges, I remember.
Brilliant.
So we had some really good one-offs, and and Mike Pickering, who then was the promotions manager, he booked the bands and everything.
Yeah.
He wasn't DJing, but he had a vision because he'd been to New York and he'd seen, especially Danceteria. They used to talk about, him and Rob Breton used to talk about that a lot. And I think what they liked was the idea that there was a bit of everything musically, that there was the alternative side fusing with the dance side, and it was coming together. Yeah. And although in principle that was a great thing, at the time to try to bring, like the Hacienda crowd, when at that point was like raincoated students, you know, and kind of goths and indie kids and
alternative,
very alternative. And then, you know, the Legend crew were a hardcore black crowd. So to try to bring that together was just impossible at that moment.
That's where ecstasy came in a few years later.
Exactly. But what happened was later, you know, Mike Pickering took on that Friday night. They called it Nude Night. He worked with Martin Pendergrass for a couple of years, and then Graham Park later came in, and it all exploded. And he kept with that vision. He always, and eventually, like you said, it came. It took years, but they stayed with that and they built that. And eventually that's what happened, is all these, like, at one point, people who were completely separate to each other in terms, were now meeting. And that was the glory of Manchester. It was the fact that
the melting pot.
I always call it the black-white mix. That's what happened. That's why Manchester was special. That's why the Mondays did dance tracks. That's why, you know, a guy called Gerald did Voodoo Ray. Gerald was a kid who used to come to Legend, my nights. He originally was a jazz funk guy. Wow. Then electro started, and he was big into the electro. He was into kind of keyboards and stuff. And then he was like the DJ for MC Tunes, and they were called the Scratch Beat Masters. And he was DJing like as a hip hop type DJ. And then
they released a couple of tracks, I think, didn't they? As the
they didn't release them together. No, I don't think there are any Scratch Beat Masters tracks released. There might be a few things knocking about from you know, tape. But he then hooked up with, you know, what became 808 State. And then there was a bit of acrimony there, and, you know, falling out over Pacific and everything. But Voodoo Ray came through and was a revolutionary track. But when it came, I mean, this is a bit of like, a lot of this history is lost because people make different. So it's like when you went and heard that track, your association, of course, is going to be with house, this new house thing that's emerging. And
so I wasn't aware of what brought it to that stage exactly.
Yeah, a lot of people assume, you know, I would imagine would assume that Gerald Simpson, a guy called Gerald, who was one of the kids who used to go after his time at Legend and everything. He went to the Friday nights at the Hacienda because Mike Pickering would play some jazz stuff as well. The dancers would be there, and I mean, they were proper dancers. They needed space to dance, and they loved the Hacienda because it wasn't mad busy, and they had plenty of dance floor space. Literally, this is what happened. Foot Patrol were like this crew from Manchester who, right at the outset of the very first house tracks that came through, like 85, 86, they were dancing to them in a jazz fusion style. It wasn't what we saw later with the hands in the air. It was footwork. It was proper kind of foot move.
And so
so these kids brought the house music into the Hacienda.
Brilliant.
So people might think a guy called Gerald goes to this amazing club, the Hacienda, hears this house music for the first time, goes eureka, and makes a track. And that didn't happen. Gerald and his contemporaries brought the music into the Hacienda in the first place. And if you listen to that track, Voodoo Ray, go back to it and listen to it with fresh ears, and you can hear the jazz funk. You can hear the electro funk. It's not an orthodox house track by any stretch. It's his take. It's his kind of fusion of these influences.
Yeah.
You know, and you can hear the history in that track of where Gerald as an individual has come from.
That's brilliant. That's a brilliant deep dive into that, because without having known anything else, you're just exposed to what people have written about.
Exactly. And I think in the first, when house hit, it hit like a tsunami. It was so, boom, you know, everyone all of a sudden, all, you know, from our perspective, people who've been involved in dance culture for years before that, all these kids now who would have said to you last week that dance music was crap and, you know, and we're now like popping a pill and going, this is the best thing ever. So I think a lot of people assume that this was new. And this was where the Ibiza myth comes into play.
Exactly,
that the music's brought back from Ibiza, not that just, you know, the ecstasy was brought back from Ibiza and the Balearic spirit was brought back from Ibiza. House music wasn't brought back from Ibiza. It was already there. In places like Manchester and Nottingham and Sheffield and Leeds. And I mean, in London, it was there, but I mean, Rare Groove was so big in London that had taken the black side of things. Whereas where house was originally be played in London was more the gay clubs. In the North and the Midlands, it was the black clubs where house kind of broke through from. So there was a different lineage to it. And, you know, and sometimes that skews the story. And
absolutely, no, I hear you. And it was a similar evolution here in Ireland as well through the gay clubs for many years. Okay, I'm conscious of time, and I wanted to, that's a brilliant look back. I obviously want to come up to date. There's a couple of questions that I had written down. Obviously, you took a break from DJing, you didn't turn your back on music by any means. Tell me how the reel-to-reel equipment side of yourself came about. Was this something that you just played around with?
Well, when I was in Legend and Wigan Pier, so this is 82, there was a once a week soul show on the radio, Mike Shaft on Piccadilly. It was huge. It had a massive kind of listenership, and it was broadcast from Piccadilly, Manchester. Now, Mike was part of the DJ circuit on the all-dayer scenes, because what happened was that most Sundays and bank holiday Mondays, there was an all-dayer somewhere. And an all-dayer kind of started around 2 o'clock and went till midnight. They brought in all the main kind of underground black music DJs from all the different places, all the kind of areas. So, you know, it might be that the all-dayer was in Sheffield, but I'd be there, Colin Curtis, you know, Mike Shaft from the radio, a few of the DJs from kind of out that way, Sean Williams from Birmingham, and so all these DJs came together. And what was brilliant about the all-dayer scene, it cross-pollinated everything. So that, you know, like, give you, you know, got to kind of give you a context to this. So I'm doing Tuesday night at Wigan Pier, Wigan Pier has hardly any black population, literally a handful of people I know of in Wigan. On a Tuesday night, hundreds of black kids are coming to Wigan from places like Huddersfield, Sheffield, Bradford, Manchester, Birmingham, Nottingham, Liverpool. It's now I look back on it, it's remarkable. On a Tuesday night, in those days, people and these people travel distances, and you know, a story that I've told a lot to give an idea of how dedicated and how much you had to be there, because you've got to remember you couldn't hear this music anywhere else apart from in certain places. So they wanted to hear the music. Now, I met a couple of guys from Birmingham, you know, few years after, and they were saying to me that when they got to Wigan Pier, there was a big car park near it. So the first thing they did when they got in the car park was siphon petrol off another car.
So they could get home.
So they could get home. They had enough money for the entry fee, which was only about 50p in those days. It was, but it, you know,
Yeah,
people on the dole, people had, you know, very little money in their pocket. These kids kind of drunk water out of the tap water. You know, it wasn't a drinking thing at all. You know, no one had the money to do that.
It was the gathering. It was the whole gathering.
They had to be there because this is where the music was. So that was the level of it, you know, and these all dayers and everything. So it was a really strong underground. It was a big underground, but nevertheless, you know, people didn't, unless they were connected into this, they didn't know even that it was existing. I'm sure loads of sleepy people in Wigan didn't realize, of course, on Tuesday.
What was your medium? Did radio help advertise it, or was it just?
Oh, I mean, this is the point. What we were saying with the Reeboks is that Mike Shaft. I started. I'd gone out to Europe when I was 18. There was like DJs working on monthly contracts in Europe for different agencies, and there was loads and loads of English DJs. And the reason it was still a microphone time.
Yeah,
the English accent they wanted, or the American accent. That was the authentic sound of the DJ to people in Scandinavia, Germany, you know, all sorts of different kind of places, Switzerland, Austria, that were taking in loads of British DJs. I went there when I was 18 in 1978 and did a couple of months in Denmark and Norway. Didn't work out the way I'd wanted quite as much. The clubs weren't great, got very homesick, came back, but went back out 2 years later, a bit wiser, a bit older, and got another contract in Denmark. Then went to Germany to work for 2 months. And that was the big eye opener, because that was the first place I'd worked in that had SL 1200s. First time I'd seen them.
Yeah.
We knew about mixing from America, you know, it had been written about from 78. We'd had a try. We didn't have the equipment. We had these belt-driven turntables. If you touched them, the needle jumped. You know, you couldn't mix. You could maybe get, you know, a chop mix in quick. You'll get things running together for a few beats and then get one in. But anything like a running mix, you know, we just didn't have the equipment. But now I'd seen the 1200s. And I also, on one of my nights off, I went to a club in a city called Essen, which was nearby, called Librium. And I think the DJ now, I think I've worked out who it was. It was a guy called Peter Roma, who was very influential in the German lineage of mixing. And he was mixing, you know, a bit like what the Hacienda are after, this cross-reference of dance music and alternative. And I remember listening and thinking, in the right context, this is where I can see myself going. And when I got to Legend with 3 1200s and this incredible sound system, first place was I'd ever been in. You know, it was like, this is it. And as I made that decision, at that very moment almost, this is when the electro music started coming in. And it was the first kind of drum machine driven black music that there'd been. So it was more kind of suitable for mixing as well.
Yeah.
So I very quickly gained this reputation as a mixing DJ. I mean, like Black Echoes listed the mixing DJs that you know, and they're in it. There's
a short list.
You know, there was a very few DJs in the country at that point who were putting the emphasis on mixing. So I built, and Mike Shaft got me on the radio, and I did regular mixes with Piccadilly, and that, you know, threw it wide. That's why I came to the Hacienda. Yeah, because they knew about me and Legend and what was going on, not through coming to Legend initially, but through hearing about it on Piccadilly Radio. And then
very good.
People like Mike Pickering and Tony Wilson would turn up on a Wednesday night and check it out. And then a few months later, the call came. They wanted me to kind of go in on the Friday, you know. So the radio aspect of it was huge. The mixes I did were the kind of first of the type in the country. It was like, you know, the latest imports, you know, it was, and then I did these end of year, best of 82 and best of 83, that were a revelation, you know, like, you know, that's, I think Dave Haslam, who the writer, said they were probably the most taped, you know, like radio shows in Manchester history.
I remember your bootlegs. We used to get these bootleg tapes in Dublin on O'Connell Bridge, which is, you know, the main street in Dublin, and we'd get Sasha at Shelley's, we'd get Coxie at Sunrise, and we get Parks and Wilson at Hacienda. These used to come over on these luminous you know, they wouldn't be black and white, be orange and black kind of, you know, so they stood out. And that was our introduction here to what was going on in the UK.
Well, they'd worked it out by that point, you know, because, you know, like they were now selling these things.
Yeah. Big on the black market, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, exactly, because you know, my mixes were 82, 83, and you know, years later, speaking to people who told me they used to buy them in Camden Market.
Yeah, Del Boy.
You know, so people were copying. And not even, you know, I've had people come back to me and said, I bought this mix, I've had it for 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
I never knew where it was from, who it was by, and I've just now found out, you know. So these things got about, but at the same time, it was like from hand to hand and passed around, you know, like there was an amazing one with, you know, like, you know, the band Chicken Lips at all?
I've heard the name, yeah.
Bizarre Ring, playing with Nile. Well, they
yeah.
became Chicken Lips, but they were like kind of based around Stoke Wolverhampton way, I think it was. And as kids, they'd heard a tape and they didn't know what it was. And it turned out that years later, a guy called PHEVER at 3 Beat Records in Liverpool said, can I play you a tape to see if you know? And I'm saying, wow. I realized it's the first mix I ever did for Piccadilly Radio. He's had this tape years, been trying to identify all the tracks, got most of them, but there's a couple he can't. And he's blown away that, you know, and he recreates this mix. He recreates it completely. And it went out, I think it's online and everything.
Once he got hold of the records, yeah.
Yeah, and it was just like this amazing kind of thing. And when he found out, you know, that it was me who'd done it and everything, and he could put it all together. I could fill in the gaps because there was these. What was really funny was there were these beats in it that only run for a few bars, and when I heard it, I couldn't work out what it was myself. I'm like, what the hell? What did I put in there? And I thought it must be some kind of breakbeat album, but and I could never place it. But about 2 years ago, I was sorting some records out, and I pulled out this album, put it on the deck. There are the beats, and it's like, there's the album, and I was able to kind of identify.
So were you just extending sections and using those beats to bring in other tracks? Or
yeah, it wasn't something I did a lot, you know.
You were just messing around.
It was there then, you know. What I was mainly doing, and this is where the Revox comes into play. When my first mix, they came into Legend during the daytime, and they brought in a B77 Revox, which is a portable reel-to-reel unit, which the news people use a lot for, or did then, for editing the news stories on the road. And it's an editing unit. The heads are raised, so it's made for editing. It's a great
big box, though. It's not something you can carry around easy.
Heavy. But they just brought it in to tape it, and so they taped my mix as live. They took it back to the station. They what you call top and tail it, which is you put, you know, green tape at the front and red
splice it. Yeah, I've seen it.
So you know where the start and the end is, and it's then broadcast ready. And so the following Sunday, when the mix went out, there it is. It's done. Now, you know, sometimes I'd say, "Oh, let me do that again." You know, we'd go back to the station. Somebody would edit something, and then one day there was nobody there to edit. And I was back at the station with the mix, but nobody to edit. And I went in one of the editing booths at Piccadilly, and I knew what to do. And all of a sudden, I was playing with this and turning bits of beat tape around and making back with things. And I was like loving this. And so I made the decision that I was going to buy two 1200s, a Matamp mixer, which was this amazing mixer designed by Froggy, London DJ. And Revox B77, and I bought that like towards the end of 82 and did my best of 82 mix on and everything. And when I went on the Tube, the TV show in 83, that's the setup I've got. You know, that I took on with me. It was, you know, all my own equipment and everything. And so
you turned it around from being a recording device primarily into being a performance instrument.
Well, at that point, it was for my mixes, it was for the radio, it was for the editing. So to give you an example, the original mix is as live, so it takes a couple of hours. They come into the thing, they record it, we go back to the station, they edit it, it's done.
Yeah.
By the end of the year, it's taken me a day to you know, and that seems an incredible. And now I could work for you know, my essential mix for that took weeks. You know. But it took a day then, which was a long time, and that was me editing everything, doing bits at a time, and everything. So what it did is slowed the process down for me, and it moved me towards editing and the idea of production. Whereas the next, you asked me why I stopped, and there's a number of reasons why I stopped, but one of the main ones, I felt I'd gone as far as I could.
Yeah.
At that moment, there was nothing else. You know, I'd achieved it. Legend was this amazing club, and I could see the writing on the wall. Things were changing. Breakdancing, which again I embraced massively, was heavily involved with that at its onset in the UK.
Yeah.
With Broken Glass, the Manchester crew. When that started, it was amazing. Everybody loved it. It was so visual. We just marveled seeing these kids just now, you know, doing they're copying obviously what was happening. They were seeing off the videos in America, but they were making things up themselves, and it was just this really creative, beautiful moment. But within the clubs, what started to happen was every time I played anything remotely electro, there was a ruck of guys challenging. It was a breakdance challenge.
All right.
And that's fine at first, but when that starts taking over, and then the girls' dancing space is taken, and they're pissed off, and like everyone's like, oh God, you know.
So it's counterproductive to yeah, exactly.
So I could see that this was going to cause a split, and eventually it did, and that's where the hip hop scene kind of starts coming off from, and a lot of people went in the other direction, which was more towards what would the street soul sound that started around that time, the SOS band, but all the British band like Loose End and things all kind of come, and then house started. So, which kind of brought everyone back together again in a sense, but
there was a split, It
was definitely, we knew that the hip hop side was emerging, and again, from my personal perspective as a DJ, the next step for me would have been to get into cutting and scratching. I did a bit of very basic cutting and scratching. I mean, I kind of took Fatboy Slim out.
I read about that.
When he was 20, before he was even, before he was even in the House Martins, he was just a bloke we'd met in Brighton. But I showed him just the basics of like cutting and using the crossfade, everything, because I had a crossfade on the Matam. And he apparently went home and just practice, and just went for it big time. So, but I knew that for me to go in that direction, I was under no illusion that to get good at that, you had to put in a hell of a lot of time. And I didn't see myself in that direction. I saw myself editing.
And that's ballsy. That's a ballsy decision as well, that you're kind of saying, you know, because there's kids obviously coming up in that realm. You know, it's not easy for someone to say, listen, you know, it would totally change you're putting yourself out of your comfort zone, and it may not work out.
And also, you know, what like the guy who followed me into Legend and Wigan Pier and the radio, Piccadilly Radio, he was almost like my protege at the time, a guy called Chad Jackson. And Chad had, I only ever took one night off Legend. I won an award, Blues and Soul Award, and I went to collect the award in London. It was on a Wednesday night, and I had to take the night off. And I got Chad in to do the night because he used to come down. He used to be one of the kids who came, and he knew the music. I left him all my records to play. So I thought, you know, it's in safer hands with a novice, so to speak, than getting one of the big named, which I suppose what everyone expected. But I knew they'd take it somewhere different musically, and it was, you know, but he could keep the continuity. So he'd done Legend one night, and then, but he'd moved. He was like a few years younger than me, and he was hungry, you know. So he'd come to my house. Even when I was working, he'd be in my house practicing on the turntables. And I was seeing that the amount of time he was putting in to this, and I was aware I can't invest that time to do that.
At a certain age group, you can't.
Yeah, and Chad became the world mixing champion. He won in 1987, I think it was, in the Albert Hall. He won the world mixing title, the Mix Mag one, DMC.
Yeah.
So yeah, you know, but my direction went the other way. Slow down, studio work. You know, kind of working with a track over a long period of time, getting much more intricate into editing. Started to kind of really get absorbed in that.
Which is all part of the learning process, I guess, and you have to focus on one area rather than focusing on 10.
Well, you can't. You literally, you know, you can't do it all. It's impossible. The other thing that I did, because I was working, I got more involved in record production, studio work, and that's what I was doing during the period that I wasn't DJing. But what I'd start to do is make tapes up of sounds and effects and bits of records, samples, talking, bits from films. I had tapes with all these things that I compiled. And when I was in the recording studio, sometimes with a track, working on it, I put the track on and I just let the tape play randomly over the top of the track. And then I'd say to the engineer, I'd record it, and then we'd listen back, and I'd wipe everything apart from a few things. I'd say, no, leave that there. That sounds good, like where that landed.
Yeah.
Take that sound out. Let's put it in a sampler, and I'll use that as more of a feature. So I do that as well. So I use the tape as a whole way of peppering what I was doing, and as an ideas basis, you know.
And there's a lot of luck involved in that.
And well, that's what I love, the random aspect of it, that it could, you know.
It could work, yeah.
It's an accident. It happens all the time in music production.
Yeah.
Happy accidents happen. But this was allowing more of them to happen in a way. And so that's why I did have these tapes. And now when I came back to DJing in 2003, you know, I had a dilemma of what was I going to do. Was it going to go off CDJ? Was it going to go off vinyl? I'd had a load of records robbed in the 80s, didn't have the complete, you know, so I'd started collecting CDs in the meantime. I was a bit split. In the end, I went the laptop route. I got a program called PCDJ.
Yeah.
And because I wanted to do my own edits and things like that. And I thought this is the best kind of way.
Yeah.
At the time, this is just 2003. I remember people were still, there's a lot of people, the idea of a DJ having a laptop, they didn't.
Yeah, I remember those years well.
And I was kind of aware of that. But then it came to me, you know, the Revox. Why don't I reintroduce the Revox and use these sounds over the top of the tracks I'm playing?
Yeah.
So kind of add into it and that kind of got it for me. And that was what I built a lot of other things upon. This idea of referencing both past and future in a sense. So, you know, I've got the future as in the technology of the laptop. I've got the past in this antiquated piece of old technology that, you know, uses tapes. Which
is very analog and not the easiest thing to keep in time, I'd imagine.
Well, it's you know, you just have your way of working it. You just sounds in, you know. It's just it's like my instrument because I've just used it. So, you know, in the studio.
And you've made it your own.
Well, it became almost like it's you know, my logo and everything. It became iconic. I mean, I remember early on, you know, when I came back to DJing, you know, people would come up, you know, like, and it weirded me out that people come and took photos of you at that point because I'd been to clubs for a few years. but sometimes they come up and they just take the photo of the tape machine. Weren't interested in me.
And you're trying to get your head in.
What's this? or you know, I remember a few people came up to me. Are you going to show a film or something? I just didn't know what it was. What is this?
Brilliant.
So,
where's the projector?
You know, it became, you know, synonymous with what I do.
I'm conscious of time. You're one of those people we could chat for hours. I want to touch on the Discotheque Archives. I haven't received my copy. I've been reading reviews.
Well, that's what it looks like. So
yeah, I've been reading reviews of what it is, and you've got some really good people getting behind it. Tell me about. I know it's something that came about during lockdown, and now you're bringing it to back to the fore post lockdown. So tell me in a couple of minutes, how did it come about, and what should people expect?
Well, it originally was a series for DJ magazine in 2016, a monthly series. They'd approached me. I'd got an award off them, an industry kind of award, and they'd said, would you be into writing something for the magazine about dance history?
Yeah.
And I thought about it and came up with the concept of Discotheque Archives, which was
a great title.
Yeah, it took a while to get there. You know, we had a few talking about, but we got there. The whole idea was 4 categories: classic DJ, classic record, classic venue, classic label. So each there were 4 separate categories, and it went on eventually. It went on till 25 of each, so 100, and that's when with DJ I stopped it because it was very time consuming. But I was aware, like from the off, that I wanted to build this, you know, and it'd give me an opportunity, and it would make a great book, you know. And so when we got to lockdown,
you had a bit of time on your hands.
It came up again, you know, like, should we do a limited edition of it? And basically, you know, and at the time I thought, we looked at the pricings and the costings and everything, and I thought, you know, if we sell 250, we'll be all right. Well, we can do this. You know, it'd be great. We could sell 500. And then you've got it, put it out there, you know, like for the orders and everything, and it just overwhelmed us. And in the end, we stopped. I had it on a rolling print kind of thing. I was printing 200 at a time with this printer, so they could get it to me like within a couple of days. Because I'd already advertised it initially as a limited edition, I had to kind of cut it, stop it. So within 2 weeks, we'd done 1,600 copies of it. And you know, the response was brilliant. You know, it was just like, it had really been well received. It looked great. I mean, the artwork is by Pete Fowley, so he did all the individual DJs, you know, so like every, you know, all these kind of DJ images appear throughout that Pete did. The Count Suckle of a British DJ of the early 60s, Colin Curtis. Obviously, like David Mancuso. He's kind of front and central.
Very iconic image of Mancuso at the bottom.
I mean, we changed the Mancuso image from the first one because the first 2 he ever did with Mancuso and Colin Curtis, and he did it in a slightly different style. The eyes were different, and Pete wanted to change it. So for the new, you know, this is the hardback edition that we've just put out now, and you can see the difference. Mancuso's different.
So you've obviously stepped it up, that it's a general release rather than just being a limited edition as such.
Well, you know, I mean, that was what the last book was. This time, it's something I want to get out there. I want to get more into the writing side of what I'm doing. I've got other projects planned. I've had a main book idea in mind for a long time, which covers the early 80s period that we were talking about specifically.
There's a lot of holes. There's a lot of holes in the history, and that's something I've been focusing on, because everyone has, especially DJs, have a very unique viewpoint of those times. You know, clubbers have a certain viewpoint as well, but the DJ was the one that was generally sober to remember it. And so, you know, a lot of the glossiness tends to be stripped back because, you know, us and the likes of yourself had to work through these times. And that's why I think it's really important, as you mentioned, to fill in those gaps and to represent those periods that people have forgotten about or don't know about.
Well, I mean, that's what I'm trying to do with this, is that, you know, it's done in a random way. It's not in a linear kind of, that you can pick it up, put it down, you can read a page. So, you know, I had like, when I did the initial series, I had 440 words to do each section, which was a task in itself, because you know, to just whittle it down and not lose any information, that was the main thing for me, you know, with all that kind of stuff in there. But I also, you know, with it being DJ magazine, I understood it was a younger audience, and it's always a younger audience I want to think about. It's great for people who are my age and my generation to go back and remember, but really the important thing is for people to understand, you know, who are coming up now, to have some idea of what went before.
Exactly.
And the artwork was so important for that, because, you know, sometimes, you know, you see documentaries of about dance culture, and the people who interview all look, you know, me with a white beard or whatever. But we're talking about a time when we were young and vital, and you know, and so Pete capturing the DJs in the illustrations and the color and the vibrancy of that. That's what I wanted it to feel like. It's something that you just want to kind of, oh yeah, you can dip in, and
that's a really nice touch, and you're right. It bridges a generation there as well. It adds an element of fun too.
Yeah, and exactly, and that's what I wanted. And the other thing that you know, developed through the book side was the indexing of it. You know, because it's got quite a thorough index, again split into those same categories: DJ, record label, club, record, but also a few other side. You know, I've got artists, massive artists kind of, and it's everything that's been named in the book. You know, so I mean, I'm a book person myself. I love books.
Yeah.
So it's me kind of making the type of book I would like in lots of ways.
Yeah.
So I want to reference things. I want to look in the back and then, oh, right, where does that pop up? There it pops up. You know, especially at the time now we're in the, you know, the internet age and the searching and the engine and everything we've got now. But
and a lot of it's not always well researched, Greg. You've nailed that. Yeah. You've just nailed that.
Yeah, you know, I mean, you kind of, you know, you hope that you've got everything correct, you know, but there's going to be, you know, it's there's so much information in there, you know, that and I'm dealing with not just, you know, obviously the main kind of thrust is on the US and the UK, especially New York, because so much happened there, and the UK lineage. A lot of the UK lineage hasn't been properly told, but I think we've managed to bring a lot of things into play within this book that you're not going to kind of find, you know, you might touch upon elsewhere, but I think this adds a little bit more meat and connects things together a bit more, especially with regards to things like the jazz funk scene and understanding what that is, where it came from, and what it developed into, you know, these kind of things. And so, you know, I didn't want it to be a kind of stark black and white history type lesson. You know, I wanted it to be a colorful, vibrant mine of information with all this music involved that you can look up and see what it is. And we now have the internet, so we can go and listen to whatever we want. You know, I think that's the joy of technology these days, is that, look, what we didn't have, if I was like going back to when I was 10, 11, 12 and we had the internet, and I, you know, with music, you know, it's like, whoa, what wouldn't you know, I have done.
But this will introduce a whole new generation to those tracks and to those artists.
Well, exactly. And you know, that's what it really is like saying, look, this is a kind of snapshot of all these different things. There's lots more information if you want to go out there digging around, do that. You know,
gives them a reference point up.
There are more kind of straightforward histories of the culture. Read those books, you know. But what this is, it's an appetite whetter. It's something, and like you said, it's fun. It's something where you can kind of you know, find out about things that you didn't necessarily know, and then if you want to kind of take it further, there
you have a point of reference.
Out there.
Absolutely. You've given me so much today, Greg, and we could go on. We probably will go on again. I'm conscious we've just gone to the hour. The book is available. Super Weird Substance. Is that the selling point?
Well, Super Weird Substance was our kind of multimedia label that we set up originally, you know, put records out, we did events and stuff through it. So the book has gone through that. So Super Weird Substance, or I mean, if anyone comes to any of my platforms, Instagram, Facebook, you know, you'll be able to see, you know.
That was your own creation, that name, wasn't it? Super Weird Substance.
Which was?
Super Weird Substance.
Well, it was Alan, you know, Alan Moore, the comic book writer.
I know the name,
You know, Watchmen.
Yes.
Watchmen, V for Vendetta.
I have that book, Yeah,
he wrote all these things, and he did a documentary film once, and he was talking about the way everything's going now. He believed that, you know, our culture's turning to steam. There's so much information out there that there's an overload, and it's like turn into steam. And this is a long time ago, and a lot of what he said proved very, very right. But what he said in that same documentary is that within, you know, certain people, they use the term super weird substance for information.
Yeah,
that's where I nicked it from.
It's a really good concept. I was trying to read a little bit about it. You filled it all in for me. I'm gonna call it there. Thank you so much for a very brief insight into the world of Greg Wilson, and I look forward to hopefully getting you over to Dublin again and
yeah,
hearing you perform soon again. Before you go, I have to touch on Hacienda 40. I had the privilege of attending and being there for your set, which blew me away. I'm guessing, like where you went musically with that set just ticked so many boxes, and a lot of people. That the recording obviously has been shared out since, but wow, what a set, mate!
Is this the one at Depot Mayfield?
Yes, absolutely. That was one of the best of the day, by far. One of the best.
It was an amazing gig. I really enjoyed that. And also, I mean, we did earlier in the year on the actual day, the anniversary.
The one in the car park. Yeah,
in the car park as well, which was really great. But yeah, that Depot Mayfield. I mean,
that was unbelievable.
If the feedback to that gig is like, I mean, I've been doing Hacienda events for years. You know, I mean, I generally keep it to 1 or 2 per year. You know, but I've been doing it for like the last 10 years easily, or ever since they got the brand back up again, so to speak. But the response to this last one, I mean, even now, you know, in the last few days, I've seen people post about that event.
Oh, it was so good. And I mean, we were there with a crew from Ireland, and just everyone was there. Have you checked out what's going on in that room with Greg Wilson? It was that good. It was a real highlight to the day. I mean, there was a lot of good things that day, but that was really an icing on the cake. So
and it's great, you know, they you know, obviously trust me for that, but because I was between Mondays and 808. Room,
all of the live acts. Yeah, all of the live acts.
Does it hold about 7,000-8,000? I mean, it's
10,000.
That room.
There was 10,000 people there that day.
In that room. I mean, isn't that throughout the whole event? Though?
Well, sorry, yeah, over the whole
different room. But that was the big room, and maybe 6,000 or something. I mean, there was as far back as I could see. It was just like it was brilliant. You know, it really was. And, you know, it was lovely to see the response of the audience to some of the music. You know, I mean, I obviously wasn't there at the Hacienda during its peak, so it's a subsidiary, you know, in terms of my career trajectory. But nevertheless important, you know. I mean, they brought me in to try and attract the black crowd there, and that you know, they planted seeds at that point that grew. You know, there was a black crowd. They originally brought the house music into the place, but you know, to kind of look over what happened in that club and being able to pick and choose music to play that when I wasn't DJing,
that mattered.
You know. That's because I was still listening to music and still into it all.
Well, you nailed it.
And that's probably what I would have been playing then. So it was great. Oh, nice one. Thank you for that.
Greg, I'm going to thank you for your time. Thank you so much, mate. And I look forward to seeing you again, hopefully on the live scene at some stage out of here. Thank you so much for joining me on PHEVER, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Greg Wilson.
Nice one, Dean. Thank you.
That was